Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to help educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality, disease-free years as possible. Thanks for joining me this week. We're in fatigue. We're doing part 2 of an ongoing foundational subject towards the pyramid of health on fatigue and energy. Last week I did part 1. Today's part 2. I want to welcome you all for joining me this week. And if you're new to the show, the By Design radio show is a program that really unravels the truth behind the very simplistic plan that God has put forth for our lives from a health perspective on nutritional, physical, and psychological balance, and how man has interjected so much dysfunction and disease into that plan. So what we do each week is we take a subject matter such as fatigue, and we take it apart literally. We want to look at foundational root causes of things like toxification, structural integrity, energy and fatigue, along with like adrenal health and our hormones become imbalanced. And instead of buying a pill, on late night TV show infomercials, a pill for every ill, if you will, we want to take these things apart and really have health literacy, because like I say with my public speaking company, Wellness at Work, health literacy is the key to longevity. And so let's start part 2, first with our Bible verse, which is Luke 1:37, for with God nothing is impossible. And looking at it from the perspective of making simple changes every day of our lives. And yes, these are behavioral changes. So I know behavioral change sometimes is tough, particularly for those of us out there who've lived a few decades. But behavioral change requires a discipline and a foresight to see where we're going. So I've used the analogy in the past with you that in my office, I have dozens and dozens of pictures of my 5 children around my desk, because that's the foresight of why I'd like to be around for a little while. And as long as I try to take care of myself, barring that, hey, tragedy and trauma could strike at any time. But there are things that we can utilize in God's world here on earth to allow our bodies the proper biochemical pathways, the proper physiological pathways, the proper structural and digestive pathways in the way our biology is the study of life, how our biology is meant to function. And energy production fits in line with that line of thought. So if energy production is something that we're after, which is the opposite of being fatigued, right? Being fatigued and tired, or what we call sometimes exhausted, even though exhausted is a physiological state that most people are not in. Most people live in the world of fatigue or being very tired. There's a great book out there by Dr. Hanley, who's a PhD, Hanley, called Are You Tired of Being Tired? And it's a book written for doctors as well as lay people that I would highly advise you guys to pick up if you're struggling with fatigue, lack of energy. Dr. Hanley does a great job bringing to light the causes of fatigue, the root causes of fatigue. And if you remember way back when we did shows on stress management, I may have mentioned that book to you back then, because it's a book that I use in my stress management workshops throughout corporate America, out speaking on the road. So what did we define fatigue as? We asked ourselves a few questions. What would our day be like if we had more physical and mental energy? What would our life be like? And how would it be different? So we want to pull out of our physical being the most energy that God allows us to have. We probably remember the days of teenage years, or even adolescent years, or maybe even our 20s, where we would be able to go to work all day, maybe go out dancing with our wife, or at night, or doing something at night until 11, 12, 1, 2 in the morning, and waking up the next day 7, 8 o'clock and go right back and do it again. And we had tons of energy. And you have to ask yourself, well, what happened to some of that energy as we get into our 40s and 50s and 60s, and we get a little run down and sluggish and we require that 32-ounce cup of coffee at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, that energy is something that's still, the potential of that energy is inside of us. It's inside of every one of our cells, and it's something called ATP. And ATP is cellular energy. So we want good ATP production. And we're talking about fatigue from the perspective that this is the most common complaint presented to primary healthcare providers. Yet, when we go to our medical doctors, physicians tend to know little about it. They tend to not really deal with the sources of fatigue because it can be a complicated subject matter. And remember, our medical doctors are there not necessarily to deal with, let's say, the low-hanging fruit. And telling our doctors that we're tired, they run some blood tests. We went over the 8 causes of fatigue, and the first 2 that we did last week really dealt with seeing our doctors. So the causes of fatigue that we dealt with last week were disease, actual disease processes. That was number 1. And number 2 was drugs, prescription medication. So we go to our doctors and we want the doctors to rule out things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, thyroid disease, depression, anemia, chronic pain, for instance, that we talked about. These are the types of things that doctors should be diagnosing for you. Arthritis, colitis, allergies, this chronic pain and inflammation cycle. And knowing that we've got a chronic illness or we have something like fibromyalgia or thyroid disease, then we could get the proper treatment so that we're dealing with an energy malfunction, something that's impeding our bodies to make energy, and we're dealing with it with knowing the diagnosis. Okay, so we talked about primary disease, and then we did number 2, which was prescription medication. And we wanted to ask those doctors of ours, can the medication that you're taking be causing fatigue? Many times, prescription medication can cause fatigue. So you could even go online and look up the medication at a PDR, that's physician's desk reference. And there are on Google and such, they have these things now where you can look and see if that's a byproduct. Many of you probably have had lack of energy and fatigue from being on a prescription medication. So that's probably not unfamiliar to you. The next one up with this medicine is that, we have to address the guys that this prescription medication, which is different than illegal drugs, even though these are all classified as drugs. But let's stick with the prescription medication for a second. We have more than half of all insured Americans taking one or more medication daily, and that includes children. So 25% of our senior citizens take 5 or more medications daily. Americans buy much more medication per person than any other country in the world. So a medication is something, a prescription medication is something that we really want to be conscious of. No one ever died from Tylenol deficiency, but plenty of people, you can die from, let's say, a vitamin deficiency. So be careful of what we're taking out there, and be careful of combining medications, because sometimes one medication will combine with another and cause an adverse effect. So the medication, or a society addicted to medications, is certainly a serious problem that we have in our country. And I heard actually on the radio today on the way in, the CDC is really, really coming out guns loaded on on resistant strains of bacteria, and meaning that antibiotics, the overuse and overprescriptions of antibiotics has caused strains of bacteria to develop that are resistant to the antibiotics that we have. Certain doctors and epidemiologists throughout the world are calling for, or saying that this is the end of the antibiotic period in our world, because the bacteria are mutating and growing at such rates to become resistant. So we really want to be very conscious of the fact of what we're ingesting pharmaceutically, and have a good line of education around the side effects of these medications. Let's move on, and let's now address point number 3, which is something we call adrenal fatigue and burnout. And those of you who listen to me during my stress management program, you realize that you have these adrenal glands, which are about the size of walnuts, and they lay on top of each one of your kidneys. And yes, if you don't know it by now, the adrenal gland produces adrenaline. And adrenaline is that great hormone that we get the adrenaline rush during fight or flight reflex. And that fight or flight reflex is very important when like a lion enters the room and we have to run out, out the back door. But we shouldn't really be using this God-given reflex called fight or flight, going to work in the morning. We shouldn't be using adrenaline throughout our daily activities. So stress directly affects the way our adrenal gland produces hormones, particularly prolonged stress. This causes an actual dysrhythmia and a dysfunction in the adrenal system, and it causes adrenal fatigue and eventually adrenal burnout. So these adrenal glands need to be protected, and they should not be overused. They shouldn't be used to do a job that they were not designed to do. So adrenal glands were not designed to give us daily energy. Yet many of you guys out there are using hormones like adrenaline for energy because of the stress and the demands that many people are placing on their lives. So just like you wouldn't hire a carpenter to do the job of an electrician, okay, you don't want the adrenal gland to be producing daily energy, particularly in a prolonged state, when you've got other mechanisms inside your body to make cellular energy. Okay, so that's a very, very important component, because this adrenal fatigue, if I have not gotten your attention by now, will cause people to put body fat on in their abdomen and in their rump and their upper thighs. So if I haven't gotten your attention by now, those of you in your 40s and 50s wondering where that extra 30, 40, 50 pounds came from, and it wasn't because you laid on the couch and started eating a gallon of ice cream. Many times it's a hormonal imbalance triggered off by this adrenal fatigue and this adrenal burnout. And that's just because in our society today, we don't do a very good job of resting and knowing how to rest our adrenal gland, because the adrenal gland produces a number of hormones. One of them is adrenaline. Another one is called cortisol. And cortisol, or elevated cortisol for a prolonged period of time, is going to produce that body fat like I just described. So what are some of the physical symptoms of adrenal fatigue and burnout? Well, weakness, insomnia, GI problems, chronic low resistance, low sex drive, drying of the skin, muscle pain, joint pain, craving for sweets, headaches, PMS, dizziness, hypoglycemia. Yeah, I know I described all of you. But when we look at the adrenal gland and how the adrenal fatigue could cause this host of symptoms that we go to our doctors complaining about, we want to make sure that they're addressed. Because our mental and emotional symptoms, not so much the physical, just from a mental and emotional state, this adrenal gland can also produce things like depression, reduced memory, anxiety, inability to cope, lack of concentration, fogginess, irritability, mood disorders, indecision, which is plaguing our country. So this hormone, or these hormones, which the thyroid tells the adrenal gland kind of like what to do. The adrenal gland is stimulated because we're overworked, and we need to produce this extra energy, and this extra energy that's coming from a mechanism that our body should not be using to produce this energy. We end up with physical, mental, and emotional symptoms. So if you need those lists again, please email me. But this is very, very important. And many, many people are struggling with fatigue, lack of energy, even exhaustion due to this adrenal problem. Again, Hanley, Are You Tired of Being Tired? Great book about this. What we want to do to allow our adrenal glands to recover, things that we want to avoid: anger, hate, worry, pessimism. Now, let's just stop there for a second. If you turn on the news at 8 o'clock at night, you think there's a lot of anger, hate, worry, and pessimism out there? So we might want to stop those late day high stress visual activities like watching TV. Okay, we might want to get into some reading, light music, things, healthy breathing habits, things that allow our body to relax. Things also to avoid: overeating, overwork, inadequate sleep, lack of exercise, stimulants like sugar and caffeine and nicotine, junk food, neglecting relaxation, and irregular sleep-wake cycles. So we want to go to bed around the same time every night. We want to get up around the same time every morning, and we want to allow those adrenal glands to recover. We want to incorporate wholesome food, moderate exercise. We want to get into prayer and being optimistic. And for goodness sake, laugh. Drink pure water. Get into healthy breathing habits and learn how to breathe from your diaphragm, not your chest. Get regular and adequate sleep. And remember, we want to try to stay positive. We want to focus our lives on God's plan, which is a positive one for us. And if we look at the fact that we live in a world full of a lot of worry, hate, pessimism, I'm no guy on some ivory tower. I understand the world that we live in, and I'm raising 5 children in it. But that doesn't mean that every day we can clear our head with our devotions and really get into a place where we're part of this world, but we don't have to be of it. And looking at that from the perspective of allowing our hormonal cycles to heal, especially these adrenal glands that we're discussing, this is essentially important in allowing our bodies to produce energy. Because incorporating these steps is a great first step, but you might need professional help with this one. If you get blood reports back and you have elevated hsCRP and your thyroid numbers are not normal, and you're dealing with high cholesterol and high triglycerides, you may want to seek out functional medicine practitioner to help you with this one. Now we're going to end there because the thyroid and the adrenal gland took me a little bit longer, but that's it. We got through point number 3 today, and I want to thank you for joining me, Dr. James Proodian, for this show of By Design and Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where you could submit any questions. Please have a blessed week. Let's start to incorporate these God-given changes into our lives and incorporate and remove the things that are increasing those stress hormones. Have a great week.